In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up consent mode with server-side Google Tag Manager. I'll be using Cookiebot as my consent management platform, but if you use something else, I believe this video will still be useful for you. Let's dive in. Hey and welcome to the channel. My name is Leon. This channel exists to help you make better decisions in your daily work using your web stats. Before we head over to the tutorial, I've got two things to share with you. First of all, in the video description, you'll find affiliate links to a service called Stape. It's the easiest way to get started with server-side Google Tag Manager. And if you use that link to sign up, you'll support the channel at no extra cost to you. And secondly, I've created a short cheat sheet on how you can grow your website traffic. So if you want to grow your website traffic, there's a free download link in the video description as well. All right, with that out of the way, let me show you how to set up consent mode with server-side Google Tag Manager. And I have my regular container open right here, and also have my server-side Google Tag Manager container open right here. And I have Google Analytics already installed in both containers. And by now, I'm assuming that you have already come to this point. So you have set up your regular container, your server-side container, and you have set up your Google Analytics tags. If you haven't done that, don't panic. There's a link in the video description with a playlist on all my server-side Google Tag Manager videos, and you can just watch that from start till the end to get up to speed. So if you haven't done that, just pause this video, go watch those other videos first, and then come back here to learn how to set up consent mode. Also, I'm going to show you how to install Cookiebot, my consent management platform, on my site. And chances are that you've already done that, so feel free to skip ahead if you're not interested in that section. All right, to install my consent management platform, Cookiebot, I'm going into new, and I'm naming this 9901, which means that it will end up lower on my list. And then Cookiebot. Under tag configuration, I'm going into the template gallery, and I'm going to look for Cookiebot. And this is the official template that we're going to use. I'm going to add it to my workspace right here. In the first field, I'm going to enter my Cookiebot ID. You'll find that when you log into your settings screen, and this might look a little bit different on your end because they have two different versions of this depending on when you signed up. But just go into your settings and find the domain group ID. On my end, it's under your scripts and then domain group ID. This is the ID that I'm looking for. And I'm just going to paste it in the first field. As language, I'm going to leave that to default, the CDN region.eu. Enable Google Consent Mode, I'm going to leave that to check. That's really important because consent mode is what we're looking for right here. I'm going to enable URL pass-through, and I'm going to add some defaults. So I'm going to leave this blank to apply globally. And then I'm going to set everything to denied, which means that we're going to ask for consent, and then after consent, we're going to update that to granted if they're allowing it. So we're not going to set it to granted by default. If people haven't set their consent yet, everything will be set to denied. So that's how we're going to approach this today. And I'm going to add this to the settings. As a trigger, it's really important to use the consent initialization trigger because that will fire first before all other tags. So we're going to set the default and the updated consent signals before all other tags are loading. All right, let's save this tag. And now let me show you how you can test if Cookiebot is working. All right, to test if Cookiebot is working, let's preview the container. So I'm going to open Google Tag Assistant and preview my own site. And yeah, here it is. So the cookie banner, I left it to the defaults. I'm not going to explain how to customize Cookiebot. That's not why this video is here. But we want to check out if consent mode is working. And at this point, I haven't accepted cookies and I haven't refused cookies. So let's test if it is working. I'm going into Tag Assistant, and here is a timeline of all the events that have passed since I've loaded my site. So the first event was the consent initialization, and that is where we're loading Cookiebot. And at this point, consent is not configured. So this tag is now starting up, and after, so on the second or maybe the third event here, this is where the default consent settings are applied. So add storage, like all the fields except for security storage, are all set to denied. And that's the case for all events here. So the current state is set to denied because we haven't accepted or denied cookies. So let's accept cookies now. And you'll find that there are a couple of events added to the timeline. So here's a consent update, and that applies the update. So the defaults are set to denied, and then the update sets everything to granted. and the events afterwards have a current state of granted because the update is applied now. This was my first page, and on the second page the whole thing starts over again. So consent initialization, Cookiebot is loaded, there's no consent configured at this point, but after a while the defaults are applied, and right afterwards the update is applied because I've already accepted cookies here, and then all events have a consent state of granted. Well, let me show you how you can reset Cookiebot. So if I go into inspect, I get the developer window right here. In the tabs up here, there's an application tab. And if you have found that, you can just click it, and under storage here, there's a section called cookies. You just need to find your own domain. So in my case, leonkorteweg.nl, and under this domain, usually there, and with Cookiebot, it's always the same. It's the cookie consent cookie. If you have a different consent management platform, usually there's some kind of cookie right here that states like the consent state. And what I like to do here is I like to delete it in order to reset the cookie banner. So if I just refresh my page, I get the cookie banner again because I basically just removed all my settings. And now I can test the other scenario. So I can test like what happens if I refuse cookies. So I'm gonna refuse cookies right now, and we're gonna see what happened. So this is the last page view. So at the start, again, Cookiebot was loaded, but no consent was configured yet because the page is just starting up. It's just beginning to load. And then after a while, the on-page defaults are applied. I reset my cookie banner, so it doesn't know what I want yet. And after a while, I clicked deny. And that's what the update is now saying. So the update command says, okay, this user has denied their cookies, and the current state here is denied. And if I click to the second page, on that page, we will find that Cookiebot is loaded. Again, not configured, but after a while, the default is loaded, and then the update is also loaded. And since I've refused all cookies, everything is set to denied. And there's one more scenario that you could test, so I'm gonna show it to you. So again, under inspect application, cookies, and then your own domain, just remove the consent state, refresh the page to kind of reset the cookie banner. There's also the scenario of partial consent. So let's accept preferences and analytics cookies, but let's deny marketing cookies. Let's see what happens then. So I'm gonna allow selection. So under this last page view, Cookiebot was loaded. Then after a while, the defaults were applied, and that's the current state for a while until I accept selection. And then we see here that analytics storage is set to granted, but all the add storage and add user data, add personalization, those are all set to denied. So my Cookiebot consent management platform, it works as expected. All right, before we dive into server-side Google Tag Manager, there's one concept, one scenario that I want to cover, and that is the concept of delayed consent. And it's a scenario that happens very often because it's the scenario that happens when users are coming to your site, are opening your site for the very first time, and they have yet to deny or refuse cookies. And if I inspect the page here, or if I go into Google Tag Manager here, we'll find that Google Analytics is loaded on initialization all pages. And the downside of this is that in that moment, so initialization all pages, all the defaults are still applied. And by default, I've set all the signals to denied. And if people accept cookies, the signals are updated, but GA4 is not loaded again. So the page view was sent with the wrong signals, was sent with denied, even though later on consent was given. So to solve this, I recommend making a couple of changes. And this depends a little bit on the consent management platform that you're using. I'm using Cookiebot, and Cookiebot sets a cookie consent update data layer event as soon as somebody refuses or accepts cookies. And I'm going to use that data layer event to send the page view instead of initialization all pages. So let's go over the change that I'm proposing. So first of all, under GA4 config, I still want to load the Google tag on initialization all pages, but I'm going to configure this in such a way that the page view is not yet being sent. So send page view, I'm going to set that to false. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to make a new tag. I'm going to call it 0102 GA4 event page view. So this is a Google Analytics event. I'm going to paste in my measurement ID, which I saved in a separate variable. Just please check one of the previous videos to see how I did that. And I'm gonna give this the page view event name. And as a trigger, I'm gonna make a new trigger based on this cookie consent update data layer event. So I'm gonna call this cookie consent update, and under trigger configuration, I'm gonna set custom event with the name cookie consent update. So this trigger will respond to this data layer event. And this data layer event is fired after all the right consent signals are set. So I'm gonna hit save, and I'm gonna hit save again. So I'm gonna reset my Cookiebot. So I'm gonna remove all preferences. So let's see how this behaves. All right, so my page is loaded. This is the scenario where I'm here for the very first time. I have yet to deny or accept cookies. Let's accept cookies in our tag assistant. Let's see on the timeline how this behaves. So consent initialization, this is where Cookiebot was loaded. Consent was not configured yet. After a while, we have some defaults set here. On initialization, I'm loading the GA4 config. This is best practice to load, because this will make sure that the config is loaded before everything else. But I'm not yet sending the page view. So if I open this up and I use the values radio button here, it says the send page view is set to false. So it's not sending a page view yet. But after a while, I click accept cookies, and that will fire a cookie consent update data layer event. And that's where I'm sending in the page view. And at this stage, all consent signals are set correctly. So please note that the setup that I'm recommending here is sufficient for most sites. So 4 out of 5 sites will just be fine with this setup. There are a couple of edge cases that will need a custom approach. For instance, some e-commerce sites have e-commerce events, for instance, a view item or view item list that fire very early. Then the consent signals might not apply to those events. Well, in that case, you might need a more complicated custom setup, but that's a little bit too complicated for this tutorial. So I'm gonna leave it here. I believe this will work for most cases, but when you are in doubt, please contact your agency or a specialist to help you out with that. All right, we're finally here. Let's talk about how to manage consent mode in a server-side Google Tag Manager setup. And let me first say that it is different. Managing consent is different between your regular container, your client-side container, and your server-side container. In your regular container, you have the consent overview under the tags section. If you don't see this icon, just go ahead into admin and then container settings to check the enable consent overview checkbox here. But if you have that checked under tags, you will find the consent overview. And this is where you manage when tags are allowed to fire. So for instance, the Cookiebot tag, I want to fire that like in any case. So I'm just gonna say no additional consent required. The Google Analytics tags, they have built-in consent checks, as you can see here. So they check themselves if there is a consent given, yes or no. And in case of no consent, they will track like very privacy-friendly pings. So in most cases, I set that to no additional consent required. But if you don't want to track anything at all, you can even say require additional consent and then just say analytics storage. And that will make sure that those tags are like blocked 100% until analytics storage is given. Well, in this case, I'm going to say no additional consent required, and I'm going to hit save. And the consent overview, this is where you manage which tags are allowed to fire in what scenario. On the server-side container, consent is managed differently because we do not have a consent overview. Well, there are two things to take into account. First of all Google tags. So if you have Google Analytics here, just like I have, or if you have Google Ads tags, like a remarketing or a conversion tag, I don't have it here, but I will make a separate video on that later. Those tags don't need any configuration because you've already configured that on the client side, and those tags will automatically take over the consent state of the incoming data. So for instance, in this case, if I accept cookies, and if I open up my debug of my server container, this page view has a consent signal of like all cookies are allowed. So the tag here will recognize that and will just forward it the data based on those signals. For all Google tags, so Google Analytics 4, Google Ads, you do not need to do any other configuration. However, for all non-Google tags, you need to do some custom work to make sure that data is not being tracked if the consent is not there yet. And I'm going to show you the steps that you need to take in order to manage that, and I'll show you how to set up all those other platforms in separate videos in the future. All right, to import consent in your server-side container, there is some work to do. And let me show you how we can recognize if consent is given yes or no. So I'm gonna press preview in my server container, so I get this preview screen, and I'm gonna refresh my page right here. And I have already accepted cookies, but that doesn't really matter. There is a page view coming in right here. And if I inspect the request tab here, so I select the page view and I inspect the request and I open up the incoming request, there is a parameter in this really long URL. It's right here. It's called Google Consent State, or GCS. And the content of that parameter are really important. So let me just open up a small text file and we are going to go over the content of that file. So this is the parameter here, and the parameter again is called GCS, Google Consent State, and the contents of that parameter determine, or you can read if consent has been given, yes or no. And let's go over the formatting here. So it always starts with G1. I don't know why, but this doesn't really matter anything. So it really happens in the second and third number here. So the second number describes if add storage has been given. So if the second number is a 0, add storage is not given. If the second number is a 1, add storage is given. The third number determines if analytics storage has been given. So if analytics storage has not been given, this will be a 0. If analytics storage is given, this will be a 1. So for instance, a G100 means that no consent has been given. So no ads, no analytics. G101 means no ads, but analytics is granted. And G111 means both analytics and ads granted. To be able to work with this in Google Tag Manager, we need 3 variables. So I'm going to go into my server container, I'm going to open up variables, and I'm going to make a new variable right here, and I'm going to call this Google Consent State. And under variable configuration, I'm going to select query parameter, and I'm going to say GCS, Google Consent State. And this variable will just pull in whatever is in that variable. So if I hit preview, and if I refresh my page here, I get an incoming page view event. I'm going to open up the variables under page view. And Google Consent State here is G111, which means both analytics and add storage is granted. Let me show you again. If I inspect the page and remove cookie consent and then refuse cookies, let's see what happens. So I have a new page view, but now the Google Consent State is set to G100, which means like everything is set to denied. And I can even make a custom consent. So let's do that real quick just to drive home the point. So if I allow analytics, but I refuse marketing, so I'm just going to allow this selection, I get a new page view here that says G101. So add storage is denied, but analytics storage is given. So in order to work with this, I find it very easy to make 2 more variables. And the first one is called consent mode add storage. And as variable configuration, I'm going to choose a regex table. And this regex table takes the consent state as input variable. And as the default, I'm going to set this to denied. So add storage is set to denied in all cases except for 1, granted. And that is when the second number here is a 1. So I'm going to configure this like this. So under advanced settings, I'm going to disable this one. I find that the best practice. This sometimes leads to unexpected results. So I always disable that by default. But under pattern here, the case when add storage is granted is when the Google Consent State parameter is G11 dot. So G1, 1. So here G1 is always the case, but then the second number needs to be a 1 for add storage to be granted. And the third number doesn't matter. And that's why I'm using a dot. So dot means could be anything. And in this case, so G11, granted, that means that add storage is granted, and in all other cases it's denied. So let's save this. Let's make one more. So Google Consent Mode Analytics Storage. In the variable configuration, I'm going to do the same thing. So a regex table based on the consent state. This is also denied by default, and under advanced settings, I'm going to disable the enable capture groups. There's one case when the analytics storage can be granted, and that is when the consent state parameter is g1.1. And this means that G1 is always the case, and then the second number doesn't really matter for the analytics storage parameter. Could be either a 0 or a 1, but the last number needs to be a 1 for analytics storage to be granted. And I'm going to hit save. And now we have two variables that we can use to build our own custom triggers in our upcoming tutorials on how to set up meta ads, LinkedIn ads. So I'm going to leave it here. This is more like the preparation work for those setups. In those videos, I will reference back to this video on how to set up consent mode in the server-side Google Tag Manager container. All right, just for fun, let's go ahead and test if this setup is actually working or not. So I have hit preview mode both in my client-side container and in my server container, and I'm going to accept my cookies first. This is the scenario where all cookies are accepted. Let's go into the server-side preview mode. Here is a page view that I want to inspect, and under variables, the Google consent state is set to G111, which means everything is granted, and both my add storage and my analytics storage variable is set to granted. So this is what I expected because I accepted all cookies. Let's go ahead and remove the cookie preferences again, like I showed you at the beginning of the video, and refresh the page. Let's deny all cookies and let's see if this is working in server-side Google Tag Manager. So my new page view has a Google consent state of G100, and both the add storage and analytics storage variables are set to denied. And this is what I expect because I denied all cookies. All right, let's go back one more time. I'm going to inspect the page, remove my cookie preferences, refresh the page, and I'm going to do partial storage. So I'm going to allow analytics, I'm going to deny marketing. So I'm going to say allow selection. Let's go into the server-side Google Tag Manager container in the preview mode, and let's open up the last page view. Google consent state is G101, and add storage is set to denied, and analytics storage is set to granted. And this is again expected because I accepted analytics cookies, but I refused marketing cookies. All right, that's it for today. I hope this video was clear. I hope it was helpful. If you have a question, or if you want to leave a suggestion for a video that you want me to do next, please leave a comment down below. I always love hearing from all of you. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and watch one more video, because all those things really help me to get these videos out to as many people as I can. I want to thank you for watching this, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.